Thank you so much for joining me for Intermediate Crochet, the Granny Square. Now you don't need a pattern to print out or anything because I'm going to write each line step by step right before we do them and break it down and demonstrate it for you so you can very clearly see what it is a crochet pattern is. It's not the simplest granny square pattern out there. It's one though that allows me to show a more complex arrangement of stitches. We're also going to be learning decreasing and increasing and how to weave in your ends. Not to mention that this particular granny square is the one that I'm working on in a quilt called That 70s Quilt. That will be in the book 2 of the Quilt is Inspired series, along with all of the upcycling that we're going to be doing. I was born in 1970, and so I have a love and a nostalgia for anything that comes out of that decade. So once you've learned the stitches from the first video and this video, really the sky's the limit. You pretty much can do any granny square pattern. They take a little bit to work out. It's best to separate the patterns line by line. You can kind of get lost within a pattern, but crochet is one of those things where once you do the first repeat of a motif, it's pretty simple to memorize and you can work the rest of the row. You'll see what I mean when we go through this tutorial. So you might have noticed the little earrings that I'm wearing. These are crochet granny squares that I made out of wire years ago. It was a 32 gauge wire and a size E crochet hook. And those were really fun. And crocheting with wire is actually really easy because the stitches stay in place. So give it a shot. It's really fun. The other thing you can do is, this is a wool granny square bag that I made. It's felted. It's just worsted weight wool and a size H hook. And I just made a bunch of little granny squares and sewed them together and then felted it. And then we lined it, and it's just such a great solid book bag. The other thing that you can do, because you won't be limited now to granny squares once you know how to crochet in the round and decrease and increase, you'll be able to work some free-form crochet, which is one of my most favorite things to do. This little bag is one that I made with just scrap yarns. I kind of stayed in this analogous color arrangement and used yarns in a free-form crochet, free-form knit style. All these little motifs were done separately and then added on to a base. So this is not that far away from you once you master all of the stitches that we learned in the first video, and once you master crocheting in the round. Let's go ahead and get started on your granny square. So grab 3 colors of yarn. Make sure that the weights of those yarns are very similar, and the hook that will go with those. So if you're using worsted weight, cotton, or wool, make sure you're grabbing a G or an H hook. I'm going to be using a very thin cotton from Rowan and an E hook, just so you know, but it doesn't matter. You can use whatever yarns you want to. So let's get started.
So one of the greatest things about textile arts, what I love, is that we're able to turn a couple balls of yarn and use a hook to make something really special, like this little granny square we're going to be working today. And to start that, we're going to be working in the round. And so most granny squares are started in the round, and there's 2 popular ways to start a circle. And so I'm going to show you those. So let's get these out of the way. Okay, so really the most common way is you would start with a slip stitch, like you learned in the first video. Oops. Okay, and then you would chain a specific number, whatever your pattern tells you to. Let's just say it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then it would say join to the beginning chain to get into the round. And so what you would do is you would kind of curl this around and just work a slip stitch in that very first chain, giving you a circle that you'd be able to work into. So let's just say, you were going to work a couple double crochets into that circle. So you would chain 2, remember to get yourself up to that height, and generally that chain 2 would count as your first double crochet. So when it says crochet into the round, what you'll be doing is you'll be going into, hopefully you can see that, hopefully into that circle. And then working your double crochet, and it's usually something like 10 or 12. All right, and oops, giving myself in a room here. You know, and so forth until you get all the way to the end, which is great. And at the end of that, you'll have the double crochets will be all the way around. You'll slip stitch to the beginning chain, and then you'll have your circle. And then that gives you a hole in the middle, which sometimes you want. But if you don't want such a large hole and you want a little bit more versatility, you're going to start with an adjusted ring, and that's how we're going to start this granny square here. So I want to show you that because a lot of times people have trouble with that. The adjustable ring is not starting with a slip knot or a chain, and what you're doing is you're laying the yarn over your non-dominant hand. So again, left-handers, this is for right-handed. If you're left-handed, you will reverse what we're doing here. And once you know the basics of crochet, it shouldn't be too difficult for you. You just follow what we're doing, but just on your other hand, of course. All right, so this loop goes over your hand and crosses sort of towards the back. Then you insert the hook into the loop and grab the yarn and bring it forward. Now you've got this very loose little loop. So really carefully take your 2 fingers out of that loop and work a slip stitch to lock that in place. Now what you're going to be doing is working your pattern into this loop, making sure that you take both the loop and the tail inside of each of the crochets that you're going to be doing. So that's how we're going to start this. And so the pattern, the beginning of this pattern is start with a ring, chain 4, that initial slip stitch, or excuse me, that initial chain that you did does not count as the 4. That was just to lock the loop in place. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, when you're working in the round, the initial chain that you're doing to get the height, that really does count as your first double crochet. So what we're going to do is we're going to work 12 double crochets into this ring with a chain 1 after each one. So the pattern is, and here it is right here. It's I'll write it out for you. It's there'll be a little asterisk, and then you'll go double crochet, chain 1, and then it'll say repeat from the star, the asterisk, all the way around until you have 12. Okay, so again, double crochet, and you see how I'm going in the circle, but I'm also taking that tail into that base of the double crochet. And that'll allow us to do is pull the tail so that your ring will close up. It's really slick. All right, so the pattern again, pattern repeat is double crochet, chain 1. Now when you're dealing with a pattern and it's got a repeat like that, make sure that you're finishing out the entire repeat. Don't just end with a double crochet. You've got to end with a chain 1. Just make sure you're doing the whole pattern repeat, which is double crochet, chain 1 into the loop. All right, so I'm going to do this really quick. I wish I was as fast as I can make this video go until we have 12, and I'll show you what to do. Okay, so that's 12, and then again, of course, we're going to end with the chain 1. Now, to join this into the round, what we're first going to do is pull the tail. And what's great about that is it closes up that little center, so you have that tiny little hole, and then it sort of evenly spaces all of your double crochets into that circle. We definitely want to keep that chain 1 here, so it's slip stitch to the top of the 3rd chain to close the ring. All right, and that is round 1. Pretty simple. Okay, so if you remember in the first video, we don't have to do a slip knot to bring that new color through. What we do want to do is just pull the loop so that these 2 loops are active. And we're going to pull that orange through. Make sure you're leaving a tail that you can weave in later, and we will go through how to do that in just a little bit. So I usually leave about a 6-inch tail. And this yarn gets a little splitty, so I'm just going to fumble through. Okay, make sure you have your yarn in your hand and not your tail, because that's aggravating. The next thing in the pattern then is to chain 3. So 1, 2, 3, and then that will give us the height that we need to go around the circle, okay? Because we're going to be working some more double crochets. Now what the first thing in the pattern says is it's 2 double crochets together in the same space. And what that looks like is you're going to double crochet, and whenever it says work in a space, you're not going directly into a stitch, you're going into that space. So it's almost like you're backtracking a little bit in that joining space that you had. So working 2 double crochets together, this is how you would do an increase. So you're working a double crochet, but rather than finishing it out, you're going to go ahead and work a whole nother one going into the space. All right, and then through 2 loops. And then when you yarn over and you go through all 3, what you're doing is you're combining the chain, your initial chain 3 and your 2 double crochets, and making 1 stitch out of it. In a typical crochet situation is that you would just work as many single or double or whatever the stitches that you're doing, you'd work as many of those as you need to get yourself down to 1 stitch. You just don't finish out the last part of whatever stitch it is that you're doing. And we'll do that a few more times across the row. So that's the initial starting, we're going to call that a, I don't know, like a cluster is usually what that is. So if you ever see a cluster in a pattern, which you will, because that's pretty common, that's how you're going to work it. So the instruction is chain 3, and then you're going to, here's where the pattern repeat starts. You're going to do 3 double crochet together in the next chain 1 space. So that's in this. It's really in between these 2 posts of your double crochets, okay? So you're going to work the double crochet, but of course remember we're not finishing it out. Work another one. This is our second one. Not finishing it out, so now we have 3 loops on there. And then you're not finishing that out, but that's our 3 double crochets, so now we have to crochet them together. Whoops, got some splitting going on here. So I've got 4 loops on the hook. To cluster them and finish them out, you come through all 4. And then you've got that great little cluster, and at the top of it, it's just 1 stitch. And then chain 3, and that's finishing out the pattern repeat. So again, the pattern repeat starts with the 3 double crochets in the next chain space, and then chain 3. So we'll do the next one, and remember, it's not in the stitch, it's in the space. It's in between. See if I can get the white behind here and you can see it. In between them. Okay. So again, the double crochet cluster, which again, this would be how you would decrease. I might have said increase before, but this is where you would work a decrease. This is how you decrease stitches down to 1. And I'm a little awkward because of these tripod things, so I'm going to start that second DC again. This will happen, don't get frustrated. Alright, so I've got 1 in there, not finished out. Okay, there's my second one. And there's my third one. Maybe. Okay, I've got 4 loops on there. Finish it out by getting them all together in a cluster, and then chain 3. And that's what you're going to do all the way around. And so because you have 12 chain spaces from before, you will end up at the end of this row having 12 clusters with chain 3 space in between each one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. We've got 1 more space and 1 more cluster to do, so that worked out. finish it out, and then you remember that our pattern repeat ends with a chain 3. And then it says join with a slip stitch to the top of the first cluster. Alright. And we are going on to the next color in the next little segment, so I will be taking that last little part out. But for now I just want to kind of spread this out. It will get flatter as you work into it, so don't worry if your piece is a little wobbly. That's okay, that's by design. Just tighten everything up. And then we will grab the light orange and do the last 2 rows. So on the 3rd round, you're going to chain 1, and you're going to single crochet in the same chain 3 space. So you're really kind of going behind it because you want to be in a space, not a stitch. Make sure that whenever your pattern says a space, you're going into an opening, not an actual stitch. The pattern repeat for this row is chain 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then single crochet in the next chain 3 space, which is this one. And when they're saying when you go into the next chain 3 space, what they're saying is this space here, made by the previous chain 3 of the previous row. So that's really easy. Single crochet in that space. It's really simple to get into that. We're going to go all the way around with that, starting with the chain 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, single crochet in the next chain 3 space. So we will have 12 spaces, 12 big loops all the way around at the end of this row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Single crochet in the space. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Single crochet in the next chain 3 space. So you'll notice the pattern says repeat from the star 10 times rather than 11. And the reason why they want you to do that is because rather than chaining the 5 and then slip stitching back into here, we want the next row to start at the top of one of these loops. So that's why there are times in the pattern where the ending won't be the same as it was all the way around the row. Rather than doing the chain 5 and slip stitching back into here, we're going to actually chain 2, and then if we work a double crochet into that beginning single crochet that we did, it'll kind of look like the same thing. It's a little thicker there, but at the end of the day, no one's going to even really notice that. So if you can see, whoop, some more yarn here. I am now, rather than starting the next row here, I'm going to be able to start the next row at the top. So this is the last row of this granny square. Sorry, I keep going down to the bottom of the screen because my arms are like way out here. Anyway, we're going to do the round 4, and that's what's going to make this circle into a square. So we're not going to be doing the same thing all the way around. The pattern's just a little bit more complicated because we need to do more things into these corners. Okay, so the pattern will start by saying chain 1 and single crochet in the same space that you made with the double crochet. So that's this one. And again, of course, we're going right into this space and doing a single crochet. We're going to chain 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, single crochet in the next chain 5 space. So that's in this big area here. Can't miss it. you're going to chain 1. And this next set of instructions are in a parenthesis. And when you see an instruction in a parenthesis, that means you're going to do that entire sequence in the same space. And that's how you would increase, whether you're doing granny squares or you're crocheting in a row, maybe you're making some fans, and that is how you increase. So what that's going to look like, it says the first thing in that parenthesis that you see above is 5 double crochet. And remember, that's all in the same space. So we're going to have to slide our stitches down through the arc. And if you were going into the stitch, that would be impossible. You have to do the space to be able to do that. So this is 2, 3. Now we're not doing clusters, we're just doing 5 straight up double crochets. If it wanted us to do a cluster, it would either say cluster or it would say 5 double crochet together. But because it's not saying that, it's just saying 5 double crochet. And let's make some room because we got more stuff to do in this little square. All right, so now you see we've got this beautiful little arc of double crochets. Also in the sequence, it says chain 3, so that's the next instruction, 1, 2, 3, and then 5 more double crochets in that space. That's how we're going to get a corner, the point of our granny square. Okay, so that's 1, 2, and remember I said in the first video that the secret to really going through and doing this crochet successfully is holding really taut down here. So you can see how close my hands are. It's probably making you even hard to see what I'm doing. I'm sorry if that's true. But I've got to hold it really tight right underneath the hook. I mean, I'm pretty much touching the crochet hook just about while I work the stitches. And that is the only way you're going to be able to get that tension and get your hook through those stitches. I think this is my 5th one. Let's see. Okay, so let's take a look at that. Okay, so we've got our 5, and this is very easy to count, right? Because you've got your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 double crochet, chain 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 double crochet, and then the last part of that instruction is to chain 1. Okay, and as you can see, it says in the next chain 5 space, so that is how we know we're doing that whole thing in that 1. So now we've got a pattern established. Now we can start a repeat. So the repeat starts with this little star, and it says single crochet in the next chain 5 space. It's easy. And then chain 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Single crochet in the next chain 5 space. So this is sort of the side. So if you can envision, here's our corner, and then we've got something to do on the side, and then we do our chain 1, and then we're going to work this sequence again in this space here. So that is part of the repeat, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And when you get crowded, just hold this really tight and just kind of use your fingernails and slide that down so that only half that ring is covered. So you've got room to do the next 5. Okay, so now it's time to finish out our square, and then I'm going to show you how to weave in the ends. So the end of the pattern is join into the first single crochet, which is right on top of here. And whenever it says join, it may not always tell you, but it almost always means with the slip stitch, because remember that gives you no height at all. Come through and through. Just turn it, clip it, and I just lift that right out of the loop to end it. I turn it over, just kind of push everything tight, sort of form it into a square. And then weaving in your ends is pretty simple in crochet because you've got a lot of nice, big, thick, bulky spots to go. So you just get a tapestry needle, and you know which size. Usually what I do is I'll run over and I'll get an assortment, And my rule of thumb on needles, because I never really know what exact needle I'm using, I just want to make sure that the eye is big enough for the yarn to fit in, and that this is not so big that it's making holes or creating problems. So there's kind of a, I can't even tell you how many size needles there are for doing this. It's called a tapestry needle, but those come in lots of sizes too. So don't get too confused. Just run over, get an assortment, and put them in your pincushion, and that way you can just look at them and have what you need and choose the best one for whatever task you're doing. That's just how I operate. So this is the back of the square where all of our yarns are. The center ones are really simple because all you're going to do is you're just going to join that circle again and run it through the circle. So I'm kind of working in that group of stitches, and this actually works twofold, because one, you're weaving in the end, but two, you're strengthening that circle, you know, which in this yarn is pretty strong, so it doesn't matter, but sometimes it does. Sometimes, you know, working these ends in really strengthens what you're doing. All right, and then just kind of come back to the beginning, and then just so that all my threads aren't all at the beginning, I'll work it maybe just another quarter of a way up. All right, and then, whoop, hang on, that was the wrong way, sorry. And then you're just gonna clip it right at the base. So there's no knots or anything in it. You don't need any knots per se. A lot of times people will try to thread their needle like this. This does not work. This is never the approach. If you're using really skinny yarn, you bend it over the needle and you hold it really tight, you pull the needle out and you pop that on. This yarn's a little thick, so all we do is we find the very end and we squeeze it till we barely can see it. And then you put the eye of the needle over that and then just grab that out. And then you won't have any problems. It's pretty simple. I do that with sewing thread, quilting thread, whatever. And that's, I can thread a needle. I barely even need to see it. So if it's not even a vision thing, it's more of a, you know, you're basically threading the needle onto the thread. This one, and see all these little threads that you're clipping are so pretty. I can't even throw those away. So now I got to come up with some fun, cool thing to do with all of these threads. I can't even sewing threads away. It's pathetic. You guys would laugh at me if you saw what I keep. I just can't help myself. Because, you know, inevitably I'm going to come across some amazing pattern that's like, oh, here's what you do with your leftover thread, and then I'll be like, oh my gosh, I threw all that away. So I hate that circumstance. So I just keep it and I figure out what to do with it. But that's what book 2 is for, so stay tuned for that in the next year or so. Nothing that's coming out anytime soon. And so I'm just taking this rust yarn and I'm running it through the circle. I'm in the back, so I'm not even being careful. I'm just running it through. I'm splitting stitches, which is good because that holds the yarn more rather than just go under the stitch. If you split it, split the actual thread, that will hold that in even better. And that is true with knitting and crochet. I always split my threads. And for a really, just a side note, for knitting and crocheting, if you're worried about the ends coming out, the best thing to do is turn it around and weave it back in on itself, catching not only the stitches that are already done, but the thread that you're using. Because once you do that, the threads will never ever come out because you've just locked it into place by doing that. Okay, so for the orange one, kind of weave it up. I'm on the back of the crochet, so no one will ever know. Even if you can see that stitch, it's not a big deal. It is the underneath side, the wrong side per se. And then just pop that through. Make sure if you've pulled your thread too tight, give this a tug too, just to loosen the slack on that, because you don't want to pull it out of shape. And just go right around that circle, and that's pretty good. Cut it and add it to your fabulous pile of fibers. Now, on the last one, depending on how you're ultimately going to join these, and incidentally, joining crochets, there is a fantastic book by Edie Ekman. It's called Connect the Shapes Crochet Motifs. So in that book, she'll give you squares and triangles and circles and hexes and a couple different ways, well, not a couple, many different ways to join the motifs together. Even mixing the shapes up. It's a great book. It's my go-to resource. So all I'm doing with this last one is I'm just going to bring this out to the end, just in case I decide I'm going to join this granny square with the tails. And that just saves, you know, cutting another piece of yarn. It's just a, you know, saving a step, which I'm all about. So if I decide that I want to join these, I can join this, you know, to, let's say, this one using this thread, and I can join this to this one using this thread. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with these yet. I think what these will do is surround a center block of the quilt that I'm working on, that 70s quilt. But the other way that you could do it is take yarn and you would crochet these together. Maybe crochet here, slip stitch down, crochet it here, slip stitch to the point, you know, join it here, join it here, join it here. So there's a couple different ways to do it, and I'm not quite there yet. But again, check out that resource. It really is. I always look through that book. I think that's it for our granny square lesson. If you have any questions at all, or if you're working a pattern, something different, and you come across something that you're not familiar with, give me a shout. Go to www.annmyhrequilts.com, and there's a place where it says contact me, and if you do, just send me an email and I will get back to you within 24 hours for sure. I will not leave you hanging. I'm happy to help you decipher and work through a pattern. It's not a problem. So that's it for this video. Next week we're going to do edgings on knitting, edgings on a crochet piece, and I'm going to show you how to do an edging around like a quilted baby blanket or something like that. It makes such a sweet little finish to a little project that you could whip out in a day. So that's next week, and I thank you again for joining me. Have a wonderful rest of your Sunday.